Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in December 2024. And I'm going to cover actually this topic here, which is using GenAI to create personalized cybersecurity news feeds. And what I'm going to walk you through is basically a whole set of developments and workflows that I've done, which I think are actually ridiculously powerful. And I hope you guys are going to get a lot of ideas from it. And it's basically, a lot of a sort of a, I won't say brain dump, but it's sort of like there's a lot of really cool things that I've been doing here, which I really kind of want to walk you through it. And I will give you a bunch of examples using GenAI on how to do it. So first of all, let's just see what it is, right? And I kind of put a nice description here, right? What it is, the data collection, the whole thing, the layer, delivery, and how it works, right? So let me walk you through this project. And in fact, if you go to the website, which is this one, CBR custom data feeds, you can already see on the docs, there's already a nice sort of like project description, project scalability, the layer, the data, I even wrote a little press release, FAQ, competitive analysis. There's a lot of really cool stuff here, right? That I created using Claude. And then actually, I think it probably was with, actually, probably this was just ChatGPT, but I usually use Claude for this, almost the same thing, right? So what is the problem we're trying to solve, right? So the problem we're trying to solve here, just starting at that level, is that in the cyber boardroom, which is the other startup I'm working on, I want to have a chat with it. So I want to basically be able to say what's going on in the world, right? What's happening, and in a way, one of the things I already have nicely in the cyber boardroom is I already have this personalization element. And by the way, everything I'm going to show you is open source, is on the repos, etc. So I can already come here to Athena and say, hey, what do you know about me? What question I ask? What's Dora? All that stuff, and it kind of maps the profile and the persona that you have, right? And then depending what profile you have, it looks differently. What I wanted was to say, hey, this is what's happening in the world today, right? This is all the stuff that is actually happening. This is all the things that you got there. So, what I wanted is basically is to be able to grab the latest news elements, right? Like, for example, Hacker News, let's say, which is a great source. And it's interesting, like, let's say, for example, if I had Prometheus installed, like, ooh, I probably want to care about that, right? So the question with this is you got this and you got piles and piles of other potential sources of data, right? And the question is what from here is relevant to us? Another one, let's see, magazine, there's a whole bunch of other places. And what I find interesting is that in 2024, this is kind of the best we can get, right? And, as far as I can tell, right, just about, right? And I actually did a bit of a research here, and if you can actually see my notes here, where is it on my providers? I actually, basically look at a whole bunch of them, right? From there's some great security feeds. There's Security Affairs, Carbon Security, Talkback, NCSC, CSO Online, Troy Hunt. Like these are really great feeds. Like in a way, I want to know what's going on with all of this. The problem is that none of them have APIs, right? None of them have the ability to go and process the data. And the problem with data like this is that it's non-normalized. There's also sort of variations. It's not easy to consume. It's in all different places. And more importantly, it's not LLM friendly, right? Because what you need is a series of transformations along the way. So I'm kind of using the LLMs on the way to create this. And this is my key point with GenAI, is that GenAI is not powerful in a way when you say, go and let's say, build all this for me, right? That really doesn't work. It will give us some good stuff to start with. It looked quite cool for proof of concepts, but you don't really build scalable solutions, right? And that's what you really need in order to build scalable solutions. And that's what I'm going to show you here, how I went from here to actually this fast API, right? Where you can come in here and you can actually get the raw file. So you can actually see the raw data feed here. So you can come in here and actually the current data feed, which is that one there, right? So you can actually get the raw data from here. So this is literally the data that is live now. And then you can then get actually this already nicely translated into JSON feed, right? So you can get, so if I wanted to get the raw of this, I can just, so basically that's just to confirm. So you could see this feed data.json. I got another file here. Oh, there you go, raw data feed current. There it is, right? So this is the raw data feed, right? So one of the things I want to walk you through is this concept of, first of all, keep reiterating the design until it becomes super simple, but also try to break things apart to the smallest possible components, right? So what you have here is I got this data feed here. So this is basically something that I go and get every hour. So I actually have a schedule. So every hour I make one request to actually this file here, and that literally goes, well, there's another one, the same thing. This goes and gets the latest version. In fact, you can see it here. This endpoint at the moment lists you all the files that are in S3, and you can kind of see, well, in this area of S3, right? And you can see that, you know, for every hour there's a feed. So it's actually quite cool because I actually have already here a nice historical view of the feed, right? So it's quite interesting even to see the feed evolve, to see when things appeared at a moment in time, because in a way, the problem with this feed here is that it disappears, right? It's ephemeral. Like once you get it, you don't, I cannot go to this feed and say, show me the feed a week ago or a month ago, right? Eventually it'll be really cool to have this very strong historical background of all these different feeds and even see how things emerge, right? So, and you can see that from a data structure, you have for every hour, right? You can see 16, 15, 14, 13, etc. We save two files. We save the feed XML and we say the feed data, right? So the feed, and we create two files always, which is a trick I found which works quite well, is there's when I save this file into S3, so there's two saves. One is the location of where you store the file, and one is the latest one. So if you want to get the latest, you don't have to do any calculations of the hour, and maybe like, you know, if you happen to hit the hour before you did the fetch, it might not be there, right? You can always hit the latest feed XML or feed data, and you get that. So, and that's what you get here, right? So if you go and look at this endpoint here is the latest one, right? And you could see that it's already nicely formatted, right? You could see that the structure, the feed is their structure, the article, title, description, publication date, author, etc. Right? There's a couple of things you can normalize here, the dates, and maybe do some correlations and map the author to the corrections, and you know, it'd be interesting to see even in the future. I could even go to the link itself and grab the content of the link, maybe take a screenshot of the link. There's all sorts of stuff that you can do here. The power is that this is now a saved file, right? So this file is actually in S3 and you can serve it. And what you can do is you can come in here and you can see that it's basically 200 milliseconds, 300, 178, 156. So you kind of have roughly around that. And every now and then you get a couple of sub 100, but you can see on average, right? You got 165 milliseconds. And this is basically, so the architecture, and I've documented this quite nicely here, is basically like this. Right? So you're the client, you hit CloudFront, which basically maps, well, technically you hit Route 53, that points to CloudFront. CloudFront forwards it to a Lambda, so it's quite cool. So it's again a nice example of a nice design, doesn't cost anything when it's not running. I don't have a website there. So I run Fast API in Lambda, then that goes to fetch the data, and then that returns the data, right? And to be honest, in this case, I don't actually do any transformation, I just send it back, right? So that's the original design. One of the things that I found that is really cool, right, from a design point of view, right, is that I then said, oh, this is okay, it's fast. It still annoys me, like it's like, you know, 160 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds. It feels, you know, for something that should be fast, right? I just want to serve. So I had this idea, like, hold on, why do I need fast API, right? I want Swagger, right? So I want something like this, which is what Fast API gives me, which is cool. But actually, I wanted the data static. So what I then did, which is actually really cool, I said, well, okay, I can actually host the static files directly from S3, and I can create something like this. So what you have here, it looks like, see, look, you can get latest feed, you can connect to it, you can get the data. See, look, you can get the feed, you can get the raw JSON. In a way, it's actually a simpler API, right? You have there, and now if you look at this, right, if I go and access this file directly, what you'll see is that it's actually a bit faster. Look, 22 milliseconds, right? That is freaking cool, right? That's more like it, right? 18 milliseconds, right? Like that's, for me, that's the speed that you have. And actually, this is because I'm here, right? If I was in AWS where I'm hosting this, it would be even faster, right? So, so what you have here is a much cooler design, which is fundamentally a design where you basically have here, you hit CloudFront, CloudFront is configured to access S3 bucket. It's actually nicely configured that only CloudFront has to connect to the S3 bucket, and then you send the data back to response, right? So it's almost like a really, really simple design. And in fact, I would argue that a lot of websites should do this, right? If it's a static data, right? Even if you generate it once, even if it's static of dynamic content, if the content is generated once and is always the same for a particular set of queries or a particular set of environments, then save it like this and host it. So in a way, this is crazy secure, right? This is a really cool design, because I went from having a database and having a website and having fundamentally, well, not database, I have like a server and a lot of moving parts, potential injection, potential stuff like that, to literally having just this. And in a way, yes, there might be a cost, but whatever it will cost this solution, this one would always cost 10x, because you still have lambdas, you have moving parts, you have a lot of other stuff that you're paying for, right? So this is a really cool example of answering the brief in a very, very effective way. And just to wrap things around, what the idea here is, then you get this feed prompt, right? So, and I will pre-generate this. So this is actually on the to-do list, right? And again, all the code's open source, please contribute if you want. But the idea here is that you get something like this. See, look, following data is from Hacker News being collected on this. And then, the final little integration I'm going to add is just to come in here and then say, hi, which of these news are relevant, right? To me. Now, of course, I'll make this integration much smoother, right? And then you get a nice sort of view of which of these are actually useful, right? So you could see here, again, correctly, this is actually in ChatGPT, but I can use the other ones. So you could see that. What's really cool is, because I said I'm a CEO or a startup, I'm doing this, etc., it actually picked up, out of the 10 articles, or 20 or 30 or 50, it picked up only the top 3 that fundamentally I care about. And this is really cool, right? Because this is a great example of using AI to translate stuff, right? And I have some more cool workflows inside the boardroom where I'll ask this to 3 other LLMs, and I correlate the data so you get a better sense for mistakes. And then I can even go, hey, is the data being created relevant into the original content? So there was any, like, you could always ask any content here that was not in there, right? But by then it doesn't hallucinate very well, right? It doesn't hallucinate at all usually. If you give it the content, it tends to give you a good result. So there you go, right? So that's kind of the workflow. The workflow is, how do you go from this stuff here, which is like, which one is relevant to me, to that, which is, again, is static, is basically is not very consumable, especially these days. I will say everything should be JSON, right? Because I like it. To something like this, the feed current, and actually to then something that is highly scalable, right? So this is fundamentally just an S3 file being exposed to the internet that the client can consume, right? And I will expand on this. So I'm going to put the prompt in there. I'm probably going to put several analysis of it in there, right? So that's the first part, right? So that's fundamentally is the workflows. And what I want to show you now is the stuff that behind the scenes and the workflow to do this, right? So one of the things that I absolutely cannot stress that is critical, right, is the importance of version control and the importance of fundamentally, I think I need to share this window now, actually. Let me just share that. There you go. Source tree, I think it's this one. No, that one, right? So you should now see this. Cool. So this is the repo that is open source, right, of this project. And what you can see here, right, you can see here that I have this workflow of, I start here at version 1.0.10, I do a bunch of commits, and in fact, in this case, you could see I got to version 2.0, and then I actually got to the point where I made my 0.2, sorry, I made my 0.2 version, I made it version 1.0, because I kind of want to show, and this is one of the key points I really want to highlight, is that when we talk about DevOps and we talk about minimum viable prototype, and we talk about shipping, we talk about code coverage and code quality, my argument is that your development environment is one of the most important things you can do. In fact, I'll argue that your dev environment, your pipeline, your test code is more important than the main code. And the reason why is that when you have a good, solid environment to develop, your main code becomes really good, and becomes really good because you keep improving it. You refactor all the time. In fact, you have a property which is the more code you have, the faster you go. And I think just about every app I know and every dev team I know, the more code they have, the slower they go, right? They have dependency hells, they can't ship, they don't sometimes can build things very easily. The dependency starts to really hit them. Of course, there's teams who don't have this, but they, in a way, they are the good teams, right? They're the ones who are really, really shipping crazy fast. They really delight in their customers because they can really iterate fast, right? So you can see here that the workflow is that, and that line here represents actually the dev. Actually, I probably should show main. Actually, it represents main. Actually, dev is connected to main, right? So you can see here that the workflow is fundamentally, I make a bunch of changes. And now what I want to stress is every one of these versions has been a release, right? It's a release that I push, that gets tagged, that I run all the tests. So I kind of know that my app is in a good shape every time I see a version number. So sometimes it's even cool that I can make a bunch of changes. I can basically just commit the changes, and I know that if again my tests will pass locally, but I know that again if my tests pass centrally in GitHub, then it's actually I'm in a good state, right? And then you can see then when I go from one, it's like something 0.1 into 1.0, it means I push to main, right? So you can see here, like for example, here I was 1.3, I did 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, and then I merged into main and I got basically the 1.4, right? In fact, you could see that I had that and already was working, here on something else, and then you can see I merged, so you can see little mergers. So it goes like this, right? So you go from one to the other on there, right? And this is fundamentally. So look, I'm on 1.18 now, right? Versions, right? And it's really cool. And on my the cyberboard room, I'm on 100 versions, right? 150 or 200 version, right? Because you keep doing this, and that's how you manage multiple dependencies. Now, in practice, what this looks like is, and let me, I just need to share the screen now, right? So screens, cool, right? So in practice, if you look at the Lambda function, which is here, right? So if you look at the Lambda function where basically I'm here, and so remember that I have already two APIs, right? I have, again, looking at the architecture, and by the way, this LinkedIn posts document the whole thing, right? What you then have is I have this thing where fundamentally you have a high-level system overview, which is basically this. So I go into S3 storage, I go cloud. So basically I have two layers, right? I got the S3 base and the fast API service, right? And that fundamentally is the two bits. So I'm going to show you fundamentally the fast API, because the other one is just the S3 part, right? So you kind of got a picture of that already, right? So this part here, so this fast API gets created every time I push something into main, right? So if you look at my actions here, I got two main pipelines. I got the dev, I got the main. Again, this is using shared components, which you can use. So each of these, in this case, runs a test, increments the tag. Usually I push to PyPy, but in this case I don't need to because it's quite a quick dev. But again, this runs all the development, and I make sure that all my tests are good. So I know that if basically I know at this stage, again, it's a simple API. If I got to this, whenever I'm comfortable, I can push to main. And then the power of the main, in this case, if you look at this, it has these steps, right? So the way this works is that I run my tests, I increment the tag. So remember now, this will be like, for example, v.10.5 will become v.11.0, right? Because now I'm shifting to main. I publish to PyPy, I publish to ECR, I deploy the Lambda function, and I run some QA tests. And see the session I did yesterday about the CI pipeline, where I go into detail and how each of these is already crazy powerful. And what I thought was quite interesting is to show you actually how we started. So if I come in here and I go into this, I can actually So you can see at the moment I got version 18 deployed. And this is where the version numbering is so cool, because I'm going, oh, which version is being deployed? I have an endpoint here, right? So I have an API that actually gives me that. So I can actually see that I'm on v.1.18, which happens to be the latest release, right? So let me show you what it looked like in the past. So I got these repositories here, and you can see this contains all the releases on this project. In fact, what happened here is I changed halfway through from news feeds to data feeds, because I think data feeds the better one. So actually, you can see my latest one is 112 here, because that comes from here, right? So 10, and I want to show you this version here, v0.20, which is, I would argue, is my MVP of a solution, which basically of the first thing. And that, what that means, or of, let's say, sorry, MVP of the development environment. And what that means, it means that it's everything I would argue you need to have in place before you write one line of business logic functionality, right? So what you see here is that if I now, and I can do it, like I can deploy the new image, I can come in here, I can pick my, actually I need the news feeds, right? I can go back, right? So there it is, right? You can actually see all the repos, all the images being pushed, right? So if I pick this one here and I select the image, and again, what's really cool about this, like, look, I can deploy a full new version that works, that have every dependency. I don't have 0 builds. I can literally roll back things, move back things forward. This allows you to have a much more complex deployment, for example, of dev QA, production, with canary deployments, with evolution of deployments, percentage deployments, etc., because it's literally a container in this case, right? So what you can see here is that I now, look, you can see the pause means AWS is fetching the container and pumping up. And look, I now have version 2.0, right? And what you see in version 2.0 is literally no business logic, right? And this is very critical, right? Because this is when I started adding business logic, right? So it's quite interesting because we can actually go back in time. I can actually go back, right? Annoyingly, this guy not giving the version number, so let me just do the same thing. Newsfeed. So let's see what it looked like in, let's say, 1.3, right? So this is where I start adding functionality of the site, right? So again, remember, each of these versions is independent. I can roll it in. I can have multiple deployments. In fact, this thing would literally run straight away in every single cloud because that container is actually compatible, right? And you can see that, again, once the version changes, I know exactly that the new thing has been deployed, right? So there you go, I'm v1.3. If you refresh this, you'll see that, look, we start adding some feeds, right? So if you compare that to the current one, in fact, you can even see the evolution, right? These actually had prompt analysis, prompt schema. So you can see me discovering the API, right? So you can always see the evolution of the API as I do it. The point is, I was shipping all the time. I was shipping in a way to my, I would argue, probably QA, because the product will probably be a separate one, right? But you do that all the time. So now if we go back into, let's say, version, okay, I can actually go back to the latest one. So let me just go to the current one. So data feeds, version 1.18, and or I could just trigger the CI pipeline and it will do that for me, right? So that's the killer part here. Again, same thing. If I go to E for versions, I can see when it gets deployed. It gives me the new version, right? So I can then see that I now have a new version deployed, right? There you go. Let's see, version 1.18, right? And that contains, the functionality I was showing in the beginning, right? It has, in a way, the news feeds, etc., the file paths, the feed, the prompt, etc. And I've also added a new thing of the summit, which is really cool. Another topic. But what I do here is I'm actually going to expose all the data from the summit to the point where you can even get some nice prompt like this, so that you can then inject this data and then have a conversation about what's going on in the summit, who's talked about what, and then I can have the sessions. So same thing, I'm exposing the data. And again, this data is available via S3. So if you go into this S3 environment and you go to the static, and again, these are literally static web pages, both of this thing, you can come in here, and if you want to get the JSON for the current event, you come in here, and there you go, right? There's a nice JSON file, again, served directly from S3, which is freaking cool, right? Just a little note that I've done here. So I got multiple things where I'm describing it. What I really like about this from a security point of view is I then did a threat model on the S3 based solution. And look at this, right? Like, on the Stride, you have almost nothing. 4 are by design, are none. 1 is by design, right? And I reviewed this and I actually agree with it, right? From a security point of view. And there's a little below, unless, maybe you can do a denial of service, a big, massive one, right? If you can bring down CloudFront and AWS, which to be fair, that probably really should be none, right? And I also did the OWASP top 10, right? And again, the OWASP top 10, just about none of those things exist. And there's a bit of low misconfiguration and low on login failures, right? So that's, again, shows the power of a design, the power of actually thinking about the simplicity of the ultimate solution and making something as simple as possible, right? So, that's one of the key messages that I really want to show here, is that if you really keep iterating and you can evolve very fast, you can experiment very fast, and you end up actually with really, really good solutions, right? With really nice, clean solutions, which is really what we want to do, right? So a couple more things I want to show. I want to show you a bit of the code. So if you go to GitHub here, you can see the workflows, you can see the dev and the main pipeline. This is a bit, you got some secrets you put in, and I use a lot these shared actions, which you can all access, right? And you can do it. One of the things that I do here, which I absolutely been using recently, which is absolutely brilliant, is local stack. So I basically use local stack in my local development, and also if I ever needed to deploy this outside of S3, that immediately I just had to deploy 2 containers, right? Local stack and my fast API, or just the files if that's the architecture, right? But the power of it is that when I write my tests, and by the way, like if you look at the tests, I have some really cool integration tests here. I have some very nice test-driven development, right? Where I can come and I can invoke stuff directly. So you can see I can invoke my routes directly. I can even start a server. So this actually starts a server, and I make a request directly to the thing. I can do all sorts of really, really cool things. I can experiment with a parser, right? And do all of these things. And this is ridiculously powerful, right? Because this gives me a hell of a confidence that the site is still working, everything is fine, and I can make lots of changes. Every now and then I go, oh, that doesn't make sense. So I got to the point where I don't think, what is the impact of the change? I always think, is that the right change to do at that moment in time? And I'll change it, right? And the tests give me that confidence, and that's super critical. And I cannot, again, stress it. So I can make a whole bunch of changes where I'm just editing a test, right? Let's say, like on the new part of the Cybersecurity Summit, like say I'm testing, let's say, the file structure, right? Where I can make changes here, and I know that if this passes, right, I got my functionality is going to work, right? And I know that if my routes are enabled, I know if I can hit that endpoint on the client, everything is actually working, right? So that I cannot stress how powerful the test is, and more importantly, I cannot stress how important it is to have a really powerful test architecture and test solution. So I feel like I've solved tons of little problems here. Again, feel free to use them. And because every time I try to do something in a test is not simple, I go and write an API. I go and write something to make it super easy to do, right? And you kind of can see my refactoring idea here, where I try to make stuff as simple as possible. So even the fast API, I created this, OS bot fast API, and that's the OWASP security bot, right? Which is a lot of my research, and you can see tons of projects in there, tons of helpers in there, right? And this is all you need to do, right? To basically create this API here, right? Which you see here, right? So you can see that I got the config sections, I got the Hacker News sections, I have the Open Security Summit section, and that's literally those 3 things, right? And that's literally, this is the one where I just wire up my static folder, right? To make sure that, the static files are served. And the static files, just for reference, fundamentally are literally this. There's an index.html, which is the one you see in the thing. And then I got these literally for each of these. I got a simple HTML page, which just basically open Swagger. And then I got the Swagger page, which, by the way, I created using Claude, using GenAI. So I got to the point where I can go, and I think I can show you this. I can go to Claude and going, hey, I need a parser for this. And then it just goes and creates it for me, right? I might not have that here, right? I think I actually have the parser of the website. Okay, so the example I want to show you here is that in this case, I send the code. I already got a bunch of feeds here, and then I says, can you do this? And then he basically I start to map up, and for example, here's the raw data I get, and then he basically starts to create the code and the parser, right? And what I found is not always spot on, right? There's literally tons of bugs, tons of issues, or stuff that I need to tweak, but it's a really great helper. And then I iterate on it, right? And you can see sometimes you get it wrong. So I says, oh, you don't need to use this because you're going to have that. And then he parses. And then I can also go, oh, can you transform the parts into this style, which is what I want? And then, this is a really ridiculously productive workflow, right? That I use all the time, right? And you can see here, I added the projects here to do that. So, and even actually where it was really helpful was actually in the original parsing of the RSS feed, because again, I almost like workshop here the creation of the schema, the creation of the parser, and I tweaked a lot of these. Eventually it got a lot more optimized, a lot more cleaned up. But it was a great place to start, right? And you can see so for example, here's some tests I wrote, give me now tests in the same style, and it does a really good job, right? And then sometimes there's a bug, and actually here's the example, right? So this is actually was trying to use Beautiful Soup 4. I was like, actually, for this case, that sounds overkill. Do we need to do it, right? Can we actually do it using XML elements? And it did a great job. And then I improved it, and again, and sometimes you go, okay, I done this, I done that, parse it, right? So it's a ridiculous workflow. I don't have the thing here, but literally this JSON file was created. Basically the JSON file, the opening API that creates this part here, each of these, right, was actually, so that open API that you can see here on the static side was created by me literally giving Claude 3 the list of files, right? In fact, it was literally a variation of, I went in there and saying, look, here's my current file structure, right? There you go. Here's my file structure. Can you give me a Swagger file like this, right? And he did it, and I tweaked it. And then when I went to the Open Security Summit, I says, okay, now I got that. Do me for this. And then the first one was wrong. And it was a good example of the problem. The first one was overcomplicated it, tried to merge the whole thing. And eventually, no, give me a separate one just for the Open Security Summit. So let's not confuse things, right? And he gave me, this really nice, again, Swagger file that I got you. So this sort of Open API file that you can process here. And if I needed to change this, I literally would go, let's say, in fact, I can show you, right? So I can come in here, and let's say I want to add a new endpoint. So I can say, can you add to this Swagger file and endpoints, right? For / let's say latest prompts / I don't know, C level exec, right? So what's cool about this is now it's going to go, cool, I'll help you, and within that open specification, right? So you can see that now I'll get this. And to be honest, there's a couple of things these days you can use. If you use cursor, or if you use other things, sometimes you can even make the changes in place. Depends on the workflow, right? But it's really powerful that, like, in a way, I can use this to create the flows, right, that you have here, and you could see that you added there, right? There you go. See, look, latest prompt returns. You can, and this is very sweet, right? I have to say that it makes it better because it kind of understood that what a C-level is, right? Return a specialized prompt for C-level executives, focus on strategic from the security center, which is kind of what I would end up doing anyway, right? And then there's a C-level, and there's the prompts, and there's the, etc., right? And by the way, these are the stuff, when you diff it doesn't hallucinate. This tends to be exactly what it was before, right? So it's a really cool workflow. And that's fundamentally the workflow that I have when I create this, right? And basically just maybe a couple more little things to show. So I showed you this, the fast API. So if I looked into these routes info, you could see that's actually super simple. That's the one that just returns the version number I was showing. So if you actually want to see, let's say the Hacker News one, here, and that's important. I'll come to that in a second, right? You can see that all I need to do is add this call, and this has route get, post, delete, etc. And this points to one of these, for example, this guy here, and that again grabs the data, in this case normalize a little bit, and then that calls these files, right? So then I have this, dependency injection. So this guy again will create, there's a trick there for a class I have that all I have to do is put this, and this will create objects for these guys, singletons, right? And then, this is where you get. So if I need the content, I go there. If I need the content of the files from S3, I go into this class, and then that class gives me that data, right? Which is there. Now, before I just finished here, one of the things that's very important is to map the attack surface and to make sure that you're very conscious on actually what routes exist. So I actually have a bunch of tests that check the full URLs that exist in the application, and I make sure that it's almost like whitelist them, right? I basically allow list them, right? So I tend to have this pattern where in this file, I actually have the list of exactly all of the URLs that are actually possible, which even from a development point of view is actually quite cool because it confirms to me that stuff is working, right? Now, I know that if I add something here and I add something there, it's working. I know if I forget something, I got tests that will fail. So, if I just make a change here, and my test will fail because suddenly goes, oh, look, there's a new endpoint that's not supposed to be there, right? So these little things, this is good for security, but actually dramatically, again, increases the productivity of what we do. And maybe just a final little example, which is really powerful, is that all of this is powered by a Lambda function, and this is kind of all you need to do to run this in Lambda. Right, literally, you basically use Mangum, which is quite cool, which basically you need to set up fast API, you need to get the reference of app, you run this, and then literally, you use UVcorn, right? And that basically hosts it on port 8080. And then I actually use the Lambda web adapter, which you can see here on the Docker image, right? You get to see and then this is, which is also pretty crazy, right? This is all you need to do. This is, the Bless did a good job here, right? So if you put this in a Docker container, when the Lambda function starts a Docker container, you would expect, in a way, a server on this port, and we will route all the traffic to that, right? So that's how you can host all sorts of really cool things on Lambda, and that's fundamentally it, right? So this is actually really simple. You install this. I didn't want to install Poetry because Poetry sometimes gets a bit messy, too much stuff. So I installed them again, just installed that, a couple of little dependencies, and then and that just needs to copy. I just copy the source code from here into there, and that's it, right? And then the deploy script, right? And the start script, which in this case is literally just that, which just starts that on port 8080. Right. Actually, one more little thing is that everything here is managed by Poetry, which in this case is quite simple. But I quite like this because in a way, what Poetry does, it actually locks quite nicely all the versions on this poetry.lock. So it's basically, and that's why the versions are so important. So you can see here, so for example, if I'm using the OSBot utils, right, you can see that I actually will lock here to this particular version of OSBot utils, so I know exactly the particular versions what you have here. And in fact, on the Cyber Boardroom, you actually can get a list of every single version that is there, so you get a sense of what's been deployed. So there you go, fast tour of the development environment and these basically these news feeds, which I kind of want to add a lot more, and I think would be very, very useful to have an API that shares a lot of the news feeds that are available, right? And then adding the prompts and then, making it a lot more GenAI friendly. And I hope you also saw that my crew and GenAI workflow is kind of really cool, right? I get crazy value. I'm so productive. I couldn't build this as fast as I did, at the speed that I did, with the quality that it is, with the testing and the infrastructure without the GenAI stuff, because every time now I found a hard problem, I workshop it, right? I think about it, and I tend to arrive at a nice solution in my GenAI workflows. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. Check the site. Again, here it is, right? It's basically, it's on Cyberboardroom, CBR, custom data feeds, right? Contribute, send some stuff, right? And then I see you around. Thank you.